One button done up.
I'm very relaxed, as you can tell. I've been stretching.
G'day guys, welcome to the episode of the ISS podcast. Proudly supports Swiss 8, the veteran-led mental health charity. Go check out their free holistic app in all app stores now. Guys, this episode of the ISS podcast is it's a good one. We've had Keith on before, Keith Banks. Now we've got him back on because now he's a second-time published author, and I've grabbed his book. I've given it a bit of a look over, read it again, and gun to the head is one of the most realistic, nitty-gritty, warts and all accounts of police and mental health struggles and resilience and growth that I've read in a long time. Keith, mate, welcome to the show, mate. So glad to have you back.
Thanks, mate.
How's the book going?
Mate, well, if we didn't have half the fucking bookstores and airports in the country locked down, it'd be going pretty well. Look, from what I'm told, the publisher's happy with it. You know, it's sold, I think in the first month it was 40% more sales than my first one in the same time last year. So that's pretty encouraging. So Booktopia. I think Booktopia is doing well. The Audible's doing really well. I finally knocked Gary Jubilant off the number one slot. Jubes and I have become really good mates as a result of this whole experience, which is one of the unexpected cool things that's happened. So of course I rang him and told him, as you would.
So does he? Sorry, the Audible book, did you narrate it yourself or did you get someone to narrate it?
No, mate. No, I got a guy called Joel Jackson who's an actor. He did the first one as well. Joel's just turned 30, I think. Pretty successful guy in the Australian acting field. You know, he's portrayed Peter Allen in The Boy Next Door. He portrayed C.W. Bean in a TV series of Gallipoli. So he's doing okay. And he's done a pretty good job on it. I've actually started listening to it today, literally. So, puts life into the characters, which is nice.
I just pulled his photo. I've seen him in a couple of things. That's good. That's
you
good.
Can see he's got, like, his Insta account, Adrian, he's got, 12,000 followers and 99.8% of them are chicks.
Oh, good. We'll have to reach out to him. We need a few Instagram specialists to pump up this barbecue campaign.
Just
going straight into a cheap plug, mate.
Why not, mate? No, he's a good guy. He's very on side with veterans, so he gets it. So after this, if you want me to reach out to him, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And mate, I'm stoked to hear it's on Audible. I know. I don't know how you consume books, Max, but if I read, I absorb nothing. I have to listen to them on Audible. So
wow. I'm the opposite. I'm absolutely the opposite. You can put it on Audible, and I will drive for 12 hours and listen, and I get to the other end. I have no idea what I just listened to. Unless I read it, it doesn't go into my fucking brain.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Yeah.
No, if I read,
people are kinesthetic, I think. Yeah. So, red wine mix, nice. Prick. If I'd known the rules, hang on, I'll just have my water. But that's the thing, mate. Yeah, it's across ebooks and Audible and the usual traditional.
Just while we're on drinks, if anyone, just public service announcement, if I make funny faces, this isn't a water bottle filled with vodka. It's coconut water that may or may not be off. So every sip, it's a bit iffy.
So if you probably have to leave, we'll understand.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the problem that we're going to have, or I'm going to have. So I've got these questions that I want to ask you about. I also don't want to give the ghost up. Of your book, but we'll just we'll see how we go and see where it takes us. But I guess looking back at it, I want to talk about morality is the big one. I think some of the themes here, because I noticed in your book you spoke about. So the corruption was horrific, and it's different corruption to what we think. Like, it's not politicians embezzling credit cards for travel fraud. This was, for one instance, there was a particular prostitute in the Tony Murphy case that had an accident in a police safe house.
Well, accident. Yeah, died of a poison overdose. Died of poisoning, but I don't think it was too accidental. They were back in the bad old days, mate. Before I even joined the job, I think that happened maybe a couple of years before I started that whole National Hotel Inquiry and Shirley Brickman thing happened. And Tony Murphy was he was fucking scary. He was a very senior cop, and at the risk of cannibalising my sales, there's a trilogy written by a guy called Matthew Condon in Queensland, who actually is doing an interview with me on a virtual bloody library thing in a month or so. He's written a trilogy about the corruption in Queensland, and it started in the 50s. His books go through the 50s and 60s. Then I think 60s and 70s, then the downfall of Lewis and the corrupt regime after the Australian inquiry. Really interesting reading.
Who were the cops? Who were the cops after the war? Was it these just hardened, no bullshit people, or was it?
Mate, I got to say, look, Murphy never saw service. Or actually, neither did Lewis or Hallahan. But on that subject, just to digress slightly, I met some guys who had seen service on the Kokoda track in Egypt, in the jungles against the Japanese, etc., who were pretty impressive guys, and straight as a die. Just they actually had a moral compass and they understood what it was to work with your mates and do the right thing. I guess that's it's like the cops. Most cops are honest, good people. Yeah, we all joined for the right reason and did the right thing. It's just that small percentage of motherfuckers who had an opportunity of influence to take money and stand over people and commit murder, particularly in New South Wales. So the ADF component, these guys were just impressive blokes, with a chest full of ribbons. And once I started to understand what those medals meant, it impressed the shit out of me. But after, I think you'd find, like with Hallahan and Murphy and Lewis, and we can talk about Terry Lewis. It's a matter of public record. He went to jail for corruption. And Matt Connor's written about the rat pack that these guys were part of. Murphy definitely was the most chilling of the three, I reckon. I only met him a few times, and he was just one of those guys who looked straight through you, and you actually, and because he was so senior in rank, he could fuck your life if he took a mind to it. So you just, it's like dealing with a rabid dog, or just avoided eye contact and backed away and did your own shit.
So a lot of these blokes didn't have a choice. Like some of the extracts from your book, some of these guys, even if they were straight up guys, or like they were getting pigeonholed into sort of doing some things or having to sort of try and get out of. Otherwise, their career is fucked. Yeah, that's right. And the other thing was, mate, you couldn't report anything. So, it's a hard time to explain in the paradigm of today's society, where the cops have got a lot of accountability and a lot of expectations and completely different culture. In those days, we had an internal investigations or internal affairs area, but that was staffed by commissioned officers who rotated through it. So you didn't know who was working there and what their alliances and allegiances were. So, and I certainly wrote about it in the first one, and I don't know, I probably did it again in this one, but, I was told very early in my career, because I saw something happening, and I had this real, save the world, idealistic youth stuff happening. And I spoke to a detective sergeant and said, mate, I know something's going on. I need to do something about it. He said, Banksy, if you do that and you talk to the wrong bloke, you'll come home and there'll be an ounce of heroin in your bedside drawer, or your garage will be full of stolen televisions and they'll have a warrant for your arrest. Shut the fuck up and keep your head down. Wow. So different world. So you learn to do exactly that. Just go, right, I'm going to work with some good blokes, some straight blokes who I know aren't going to try and steal money on a raid or, sell heroin back to dealers or whatever. And it's like, water finds its own level. So I was lucky enough to be able to identify people like that. And when I got flicked out of the drug squad because I wouldn't go along with something and got transferred to a suburban CIB office, which was punishment, best thing they could have done for me.
because I actually found good blokes who genuinely wanted to be coppers and lock up the bad guys and protect people from that. So it's and people have often asked me over the years how I worked in an environment that was corrupt. And I say again, the vast majority of coppers were good people, but in that group of good people, there were the ones who weren't. And I've written about being offered a bribe to screw up an extradition. Excuse me. I've written about being asked to sell heroin when I was back in the undercover world. All of that stuff still horrifies me, because I look at that and go, those bastards were allowed to get away with this, because taking that whistleblower step would have been at least a career limiting move, if not something that you'd end up, pretty severely injured over, because there were coppers who had accidents and, were suddenly shanghaied overnight to Camberwell outside Mount Isa, because they said the wrong thing. It was a bizarre environment.
So this sense of morality that you see it in the Defence Force. People, we sort of spoke about this, the reason, because I want to sort of tie this in, especially with the Brereton report and this morality. You joined for a particular reason, and it was for you an idealistic viewpoint from a young age. And we were speaking to some other people, and we're talking about people who went to Afghan. Some people went just because they wanted to go and they wanted to run a gun and, see what life was like. It was the adventure of their generation.
Sure.
Once they got there, they developed their morality and went, oh, these people are actually, these women and children need a help. Like, these people are kind of really shit. And they developed the reason. But yours was cemented that you went in as a black and white Puritan, I'm here to help. Yeah,
mate. I grew up in a pretty bad childhood house, so an abusive stepfather, an alcoholic, a wife beater and kid beater, and I really wanted to do something with my life that would protect people from bullies and predators. And it was either the ADF. I was a shoe-in for Duntroon, because my marks were pretty good, very good actually. And I was a cadet under officer in the Army Cadets. I had a WO2 that was a Vietnam veteran that was going to be my sponsor. But I literally couldn't stay another 12 months in that household. So I had an opportunity to join the cops. So whether it was cops or ADF, it was going to be something that I felt was a genuine, almost a noble profession, something to do, something to give back to society. And it was never about the money. Cops weren't paid a hell of a lot in those days, and I'm sure soldiers weren't either. So it was never about that. It was about something with meaning, yeah. And whether that was maybe that was just not rebelling, but compensating for a challenging childhood and wanting to actually help people. That's probably at the root cause of it. But even though I grew up in that challenging environment, my mother, God bless her, had she grew up in the bush, yeah. So bush country people are genuinely or generally very, very honest, straight down the line folk, and that was instilled in me from her and from her family, I guess. I've sat on the psychiatrist's couch long enough, and I'm starting to figure all this shit out at last. But I think that's what it was, mate. As cliched as it sounds.
How many of the mates in the cops with you came from the same type of background?
As I started to open up to blokes, and I keep saying blokes because the amount of women was quite small in those days. As I started opening up, a hell of a lot of us joined because we'd been pushed around as kids or grew up in bad environments. Yeah. There were a few that had gone to private school and didn't have that. They wanted to join for their own reasons. But the more I spoke to blokes, particularly over a few beers, because I was always quite guarded about it. I thought I was the only one that sort of life had ever happened to. And as I got a little older, sort of in my early 20s, it became more and more obvious that was the case in a lot of us. And even when I talked to Jubes joined because he wanted to protect people from bullies. And, when I was in Sydney last year, went up there and had beers with him and the boys. we had this conversation. Every single man at the table had joined for that reason. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I ask. We had the same experience just after, with our group of mates that we're in the military with, and there's outliers in every kind of scenario, obviously, but it was high volume of the boys came from either troubled family, troubled childhood, or there was something in their upbringing that they were driven to want to eliminate evil and like you said, protect people against bullies. And that either came from being bullied yourself or, there's 101 other reasons. But, the majority of the lads had issues with family and kind of that what's supposed to be the traditional safety blanket growing up. And that's, I think, it either makes you or breaks you, and it turns a lot of people to want to be that kind of protector in that protector role, which is good.
Yeah, I think so, mate. And, and the whole brotherhood, the camaraderie of the ADF and the cops, you will never get anywhere else. But I did see it when I worked later in criminal intel. I saw it in outlaw motorcycle gangs where blokes had come from a particularly bad background or, come out of jail and were looking for that belonging and that sense of tribe. The trouble was OMGs are engaged in not all of them. Let's be, we don't want to generalize, of course. The vast bloody majority of them are engaged in criminal activity. So the sense of tribe drives them that way, whereas my sense of tribe drove me this way. Pretty interesting to, at the age of 60 plus, I reflect on that now, and it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. I had a good chat to Jews about this too, about men, soldiers, or defense people, cops, any first responder. Outlaw motorcycle gangs came up, rugby, footy players, anyone who goes to join a team, choose a career as being, I want to be part of that. It's fundamentally, it's the sense of, I know footy players are a bit different. They might do it for the money and the girls, but fundamentally for males, it's that want to be part of a tribe and feel protected by it. And you hit 17 and you make the choice. You go left and you become a cop, or you become a soldier, or you go right and you join a bikie gang. A few years down the track, you're in very different places.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's it's really interesting, the whole sense of belonging, isn't it? And kids who grow up particularly without a good, strong male role model need that brotherhood, and they need that guidance. It's interesting is that when you think you're the only one in the middle of it, you actually question what your worth and your morals are, or your approach, I guess. Once you realise that it's more common than not, it actually gives you a sense of peace to go, okay, right, now I understand why I took the path that I did in life. So it's like, and we'll talk, sorry, Nick, so I know you've got some questions, but I do go down these little pathways.
No, go for it.
So when I joined tactical, once I realised there was a tactical unit, and I wanted to be there because that's where all the adventure was, that in itself was another level of camaraderie that was even better than being in the general cops or being a detective. That was, that was where you're messing around with automatic weapons and learning how to breach strongholds and having all that fun stuff. And that's when, as you guys know, that's when you trust someone who's actually literally at your back with a loaded weapon who will take out an enemy who's trying to take you out. That ramps it right up to another level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that is, again, I'll let you get back on track. Me and you, Keith, I reckon we could go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, and we'll get 2 hours in and we won't have talked about your book. But that is what we're finding is the drama when you leave, because that excitement, your brothers around you, that sense of safety and security, adventure, challenges, all of that goes away. And then it's that same person, the same human standing there going, what am I going to do now?
Yeah. I went through that when I left the cops to go into retail of all places. Holy. But anyway, next back to you, brother.
No. Because it really interests me, because instead of getting guests on and going, hey, let's talk about the things that everyone's going to talk to you about. My interesting thing is, some of the time you've been offered you could have made a little bit of cash taking some bribes, mate. You could have changed your whole life, right? Yeah. So my question is, and not to take offense to this, but you know, your morality was straight down the line for a reason. What? And there's a fiscal number for the cash you've been offered. If that wasn't the limit, did you have a limit? Would there have been a point where you would have been? Or would there have been
that's a hard question, mate. You know, because I could sit here and go, no, $1 million wouldn't have been enough, 10 million wouldn't have been enough. I'd be thinking, you know, $10 million, you could disappear pretty easily in those days. That's a really good question. That's the old ethical dilemma, isn't it? And then I guess the response is, well, what would I have to do for that? You know, what action would I have to take? And that's how corruption starts. You know, there's a lot of studies. It started with the Nat Commission in New York City when Frank Serpico was the whistleblower and got shot in the face for it. And they talked about noble cause corruption. Yeah, noble cause corruption starts with, okay, I'm going to bend the rules today because Adrian's an armed robber. I haven't got enough evidence on him, so I'm going to plant some evidence to make sure he goes away. Noble cause corruption. Yeah, I'm going to plant a gun on him. I'm going to load up the evidence. I'm going to fabricate a confession. Yep. So cops go, that's okay. Others might be, well, you know, I'm going to take some money from some brothels because it's a public service anyway. It shouldn't be illegal. You know, they're trying to do the right thing. They've got something to. So if they slip me $1,000 a month, what's the harm in that? Yeah. And then you have other cops who go, well, you know, here's Mex. He's selling a shitload of heroin. You know, I'm going to arrest him. Fuck, I found $200,000 in his house. Now, if I don't take that, he's just going to spend it on a defense barrister anyway. So what's the harm? So it's a real slippery slope, you know. And we as cadets, we actually were taught these scenarios in the academy. So, you know, at that tender age of 17 and onwards, when you're really impressionable, I remember sitting in class looking at it going, wow, you know, I would never do that, never. Someone came up to me and said, I don't know, sell me your Glock for, you know, 14 grand. You'd go, piss off, mate. Sell me your Glock for 200. Oh, Jesus. You know, so it really depends on the individual. So notice how I'm cleverly avoiding the answer.
I was about to say, you're very political, mate, very political.
I may have a career I've not even considered. But I don't know, mate. It's interesting. It would depend, you know, really how much there's involved and what I'd have to do for it. Then because I'd have to live with myself after that. That's the issue, isn't it? You know,
and that goes into that moral injury stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. Like guys who whack people for money. You know, there's certainly some cold, hard stone killers in the country. There have been, and there still are right now, and they'll whack you if the price is right. Now that's a complete sociopathic or psychopathic personality who has no empathy and no remorse. You know, I've shot people as a cop, but not for money, if that makes sense. And those engagements have been in the rules of engagement. So, you know, real and impending fear of life, mine or others. Yep, no issue with that at all. But to actually take money to go and cold-bloodedly put two in someone's head is something I could never countenance. There wouldn't be enough money in the world for me to do that.
So at the start, you were saying, it is a slippery slope, isn't it? So if you, it'd be like anything. Like as soon as you take one bribe, you go home, you look in the mirror, you justify to yourself why you did it for the right reasons and blah, blah, blah. Then you take another one, And over time, you're like, oh yeah, I just take bribes all day. You could only imagine. I mean, I'm sure there is some legitimate psychopaths and sociopaths out there, but there's got to be along the same line. You'd think people who get forced to end someone's life at one stage, if they have to do it again and again and again and again, anything can be numbed down over time. And that's, sure. Yeah. I think you're right. I think taking bribes. If Mex asked me that offline, I mean, the dollar figure would probably be pretty low. But like you said, it depends what for. And I, in the back of my mind, whenever I've had to bend or break rules in the past, it's always been that the real moral or ethical piece was, if I do this 5 times this week, is it going to mean that I find it easy to do it next week? And if the answer is yes, and you're like, don't take 10 grand, even though you know you're going to get away with it, because next week you're going to get offered 50 to do stuff that you really don't want to do.
Mate,
and you probably say yes.
Spot on. And so the Fitzgerald inquiry started in 1987. And it finished 2 years later. And there were some pretty senior police who were convicted and went to jail, lost their jobs, lost their super and so on. And And I remember looking at them when they were charged, and a few of them thinking, shit, I never would have picked that. And one of these guys in particular was given cash, and he started when he was in the licensing branch, so the vice would. And he gave evidence to say, yeah, I took it because I thought I had to. I never spent it. I just took it home. And he had it all stored through his garage in brick cavities, all these thousands of dollars that he never spent, you know. And that probably is an indictment on that culture. It's also an indictment on his lack of morality and strength to say, fuck you, I'm not taking it. You do what you want, I'm not taking it. You know, so that's what Frank Serpico did in the NYPD and the Narcotics Bureau back in the day. Or sorry, before he went to there, he just said, you guys do what you want to do. It's not me. But a lot of people with probably that lack of conviction fell into that trap. And it's like, you know, sexual favors. So I wrote him a first book when I was a very naive young graduate cadet. I didn't even know what a massage parlor was, but we went to a massage parlor and to execute what was called a warrant of commitment. So if you didn't pay a fine, you're issued with a summons. If you didn't attend court, they'd issue a warrant for, you know, $200 that was your fine. If you had the warrant of commitment executed on you and didn't have the cash, you went to jail. You know, you might do 3 days in the bin. So we went to this massage parlor. Even though they were illegal, they were condoned because in the whole culture of corruption of the licensing branch, we were just told as uniformed blokes, do what you're told, right? Ask no questions. So I rocked up there with this old, he was probably late 20s, senior constable, and I was, you know, 18, and opened the door, and this little honey answered the door, and I went, shit, okay. And he walked in, and he knew them all. He went, yeah, he's got a warrant of commitment for, you know, Sally. And I remember looking around, I went, it still makes me laugh. I looked around and saw all these beds and said to him in front of everybody, I said, well, this is a massage parlor. Where are the tables and things? He got me outside after they all pissed themselves laughing. And he got me in the car and he said, righto, mate. He said, that's prostitutes. And it all went click. Because I was from the country. I came straight from the bush, a little town in the bush, and 2 years in the academy. I had no clue what was going on. And he said to me, right, during your career, you're going to come across a lot of prostitutes, and a lot of them are going to be pretty, right? And you're a young bloke, you'll be offered sex, without doubt. He said, but as soon as they wrap their legs around your back, they've got you fucking forever. Do not fucking spit on your badge. And that all resonated with me on that. And I remember thinking, yep, got it. And because there was a bloke who was a great moral model. You know, there was a guy who said, this is what it is. And as I got a little more service and experience, we used to talk about people like Tony Murphy, but you'd talk about them on night work when no one else was around to listen. You know, so I remember a senior Connie talking to me, I think it was it was before I went undercover. And, you know, I was excited. I wanted to be a detective. And he said, he said, I'd wait for a while, mate. I'd wait until Tony Murphy fucking retires, because if you go in there when he's running the show, I've got no hope for you. Really? He said, oh, yeah. This is what will be expected. You'll have to take quids. You'll have to load blokes up. You'll have to get on the piss every second shift, you know, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't paint a glowing picture of what it was like to be a detective. So, yeah, different era.
Mate, young blokes all need a role model like that. Like, testosterone is a hell of a drug, and when you got too much of it and you've got an undeveloped brain, your testosterone will get you in a world of trouble.
Yeah, I've been guilty of that, I'm sure. As we've said something with Mex, he's dropped contact.
Yeah, no.
No, Mex is just listening.
I think,
right. You disappeared there, mate.
Oh, that's all right, mate. If it drops out, just keep going, and the audio will pick up again.
Yeah, cool.
The Brereton report that's happening now with the SAS, and we talk about these moral injuries you spoke about, you know, maybe not now, but I have to live with that in 10 years' time. You know, if these things happen, I think you see these things happening when people don't have that volition. You this sort of stuff. With the SAS having a bit of a piss up at their barrack, that have the opportunity to put their hand up and say no, or just not be part of it. But then 10 years later, morality caught up with them, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't actually want to be part of that. You're like,
Yeah. You're talking about the stuff at the Gratwick Club.
yeah.
Yeah. I read about that during the week because having been over there and trained with them, I went to the Gratwick Club a few times. And you're right, mate. It's paradigm shift, isn't it? You know, what was acceptable 10 years ago is no longer acceptable now. Judged for having a nudie run 10 years ago?
Absolutely not.
Because it offends people now? You know?
Yeah.
Should you be judged for getting on the gas and telling fucking bad jokes 10 years ago because it's not acceptable now? You know?
No. Well,
and I think... Go, yeah.
This was like Mick Von Berg. We had him on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. He was, they would go 3 Squadron, help them raise recon platoon in Vietnam. After every day, nearly every day, they'd all get on the cans and then to be up and trained. I mean, one of your operations you did, Operation Boarhead.
Yep.
Having beers afterwards. Operation like
exactly,
fucking beers.
Yeah, and a yippee shoot first, then some beers. You know, nowadays you'd be wow. Whew, the boss would be demoted. It'd be wringing of hands. But that's what the culture was then. You know, I remember, mate. We went out. We did an operation. Shot a guy at a siege at the Gold Coast, and I've written about that. You know, where the scariest cat in the world was there. You know. I still chuckle about, which is another story that, should be a hook in for people to read the book. But so we shot this guy and then came back to Brisbane and we're on the gas all night, because shooting offend, that was after Operation Flashland. So we're engaged we shot more people in 2 years than we ever had in the history of the team. And so we're back at my house, full of fucking tear gas, still in our blacks. Stayed up all night, just got on the gas, the rum, and then went to the office and drove. And went to the office the next morning. The boss went, "You bunch, get someone to take you home, have a shower, clean yourself up, come back to work." Not a drama, because he got it, I guess. But now that'd be sackable offence, So, and I personally, because I think the Brereton report and that investigation, I think it's been trialled by media because I'm from a background which is natural justice. Innocent till proven guilty in a court of law, not tried by the Age newspaper, or fucking 60 Minutes or whatever. Or, those soft cocks who sit on Twitter and make commentary that, probably fat fuckers who exist on donuts and cans of Coke. It pisses me off. But, And now the Brereton inquiry is going into getting on the gas and the boozer, or RS being in a bloody bar in wherever it was, Tarrancount or wherever it was, where guys are dressed up in fancy dress. Big deal, But suddenly that's atrocious and outrageous, and it's got nothing to do with the allegations that have been made against those troopers. Nothing at all. It's certainly a combination, I think, of tall poppy syndrome and just those fuckers who like to pick and criticize about things they'd never understand. They saw an angry man, they'd be whimpering in the corner, So, because I have 2 daughters. My eldest daughter has told me I have this attitude because I'm biased towards Ben Roberts-Smith and I'm biased towards the SAS and the ADF, and she's probably right. But I still want fairness and natural justice, to have a fucking flag folding ceremony for 2 Squadron on yet to be proven allegations. It's just fucking appalling. Anyway.
Well, if that was what you got
on the soapbox.
You joined up for justice, right? You make sure justice is served, and this doesn't sound like justice.
Yeah.
It's trial by media. And that's the Court of Australia.
Yeah, exactly right, mate. And here's okay. 1942, you had the 39th Militia and 2nd 14th, 2nd 16th, 2nd 17th fighting along the track. Yeah, when in a fighting withdrawal. Then they got as far as Irobyra Ridge. I can never pronounce it. Then reinforced and fought the Japanese back. Now, when they fought the Japanese back towards Kokoda, there's documented evidence that no prisoners were taken. I have no issue with that. Some of those Japs were literally cannibalizing and eating flesh of Australian soldiers. We know the history of it. And those diggers went in there, and I've been fortunate enough. They're passed on now, but because I walked the track about 10 years ago, and I was fortunate enough to meet a lot of veterans when I came back. And speaking of these blokes, they went, yeah, absolutely. The Japs' fate was sealed on that fight back. Now, that was okay. Well, I'm sorry, because I had this discussion with some guy, and I won't name him, some fucking Army Reserve guy who's a legal eagle, he's a colonel, blah, blah, blah. And I went to a dinner, and he made the mistake of talking about this. And I arced right up. And I said, natural justice, legal rights, presumption of innocence, blah, blah, blah. And I said, so, World War II. Yeah. I gave him that example. What's your response to that? And he said, oh, well, it wasn't an offence. It wasn't legislated. The war crime legislation doesn't apply. So what you're telling me is the behaviour of someone in a theatre of war varies because of legislation. It just fucking makes me so mad. And I'm not suggesting that, if something, if a prisoner has been hogtied and has been shot through the back of the head, that's acceptable. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that a lot of these are unfounded allegations, and the credibility of those alleged witnesses has not yet been tested. So yet they're dismantling two squadron. I don't get it. In my view, it's, as a humble civilian, it's a knee-jerk reaction, and it's all about we have to be seen to be doing the right thing, rather than standing up and going, no, fuck you. There's an investigation on. We will make a decision after that investigation is finalised.
Yeah,
I think
there's a single. Yeah, go, mate.
Oh, mate, I was just going to say, I think there's two parts. One is being, like you said, you can't punish someone for committing a 2020 crime in 2000. It just doesn't make. I mean, there is some crimes that do make sense. There's some that don't. This came up a lot with the. Oh, I'm having a mind blank. I shouldn't have tried to think of it. What's the American comedian, black dude? Where's Cosby?
Oh, Bill Cosby, yeah.
So people are talking about him getting prosecuted for stuff he did so long ago. I'm like, well, that's been a pretty kind of vicious crime for a couple of centuries now. So I think it's okay to go after him. Yeah. Whereas waiting and trying to go 2020 woke standards of how society's supposed to be played out. Can we judge people for not acting like that 20 years ago? The answer is of course not, because I'm a firm believer that over time, we have to update our kind of moral left and right of arc. If I walk down the street today and hit someone in the head with an axe and kill them, that's a problem. If I did that 1,000 years ago, maybe not so much of a problem. Yeah. So obviously, like, moral right and wrong as far as the law goes has to be updated, but it has to be updated slowly as people evolve. And at the moment, I think the problem is society's tried to evolve to this super liberal kind of place when the humans in the society just haven't. And I think that's what's causing all the dramas. But the other one, the media piece, I think the biggest problem we've got at the moment is media picks a side, they write a story and they're like, I've backed that horse. And now I've got to find a gotcha moment, because if I haven't got the full story, and that's when they edit it, they trim the edges, they find what they think is a gotcha thing and they put it up there and they don't really care. And the problem we have is that politicians and high-ranking officers in the military, instead of telling the media to beat it, back off, we're going to run our trials and then we're going to act, they're so worried about what the media says about their leadership that they act and respond to media before an investigation's even taken place. Like, as far as, I mean, you can probably fill me in on this, like, from all the Law and Order I've watched, my understanding of the law, if a jury is definitely biased by what the media has been spinning for the last 6 months, isn't that mean that the case should more likely be thrown out?
What you'd have, that's American, mate, but
Law and Order's got me again.
Yeah, there you go. But a good example of that is the Clarendon murder trial in Perth. Yeah, where that guy was charged with, were there 3 or 4 young women who were kidnapped from the entertainment area in Perth, raped, murdered. Yeah, and the investigation went for over 22 years or something. DNA evidence finally was sufficient. They pinched him. There was a podcast on it. There was so much media attention that the prosecution actually got on the front foot and applied for a judge-only trial. Now, I'd rather sit in front of a jury if I was a bad guy, because a jury can be manipulated. Yeah. And you know that you can turn up there and you can be the nicest guy in the world, and they'll say you had a misbegotten youth and blah, blah, blah. And a jury will sometimes fall for it. A judge doesn't give a rat's about that. He just, or she just looks at the evidence. And that's why this guy was convicted. Bang. You know, so that could happen. You know, but these investigations will take, and I think you've got the AFP looking at it. You've got a special investigations area looking at it. I think there's a courts martial or something. Yeah, so the ADF have got their own investigations. There's 3 different investigations into the same stuff. This could drag on for years. I'm really concerned about, you know, and I'll, you know, again, I'll say I'm not defending something if someone had been slaughtered when he was tied up, and you know that's total wrong. But the allegations and having been subject of allegations as a cop myself, you know, just completely vexatious allegations that are there to try and fuck up an investigation. Yeah. It really pisses you off. And they're only investigations in my case of assault, you know, like people alleged I'd belted them or whatever. And sometimes I did. And
allegedly.
Allegedly. But, you know, you just go, oh, God. But these poor guys are going to spend years going through this and then waiting for the opportunity to defend themselves. The mental health impacts on that are going to be huge. I don't care how much of a tough guy, how much of a warrior you are, your mental health is going to suffer for sure. And that's the unfairness of it, you know.
I think
it should have just been, here's an investigation done. Sorry.
This media manipulation, mate, and I know this is big for you, and I don't want to give too much away. So, go, you fuckers, if you want to know the inside scoop, go and read the book. But
yeah, true. Let me turn the light on, man. Keep going.
Operation Flashdance.
Yep.
Go into the whole thing, but there was concerns because there was the investigation going on in the inquiry, and they made you, and that was the background is that they made you launch that operation on a specific day. They told you when to launch it right early, and you could use some certain things.
Yep.
Now I read that and I looked at the Brereton report and I'm like, this is manipulation. This is government agencies using the media again.
Mm-hmm.
Changing it. I guess the background of that. Can you explain?
It's not so much the operation, but the preamble before.
Yeah.
And
yeah, sure. Yeah, mate, happily, because I'm still 100% convinced that was the case. And in fact, I was talking to the mother of my mate who was killed in that operation only today. You know, because I chat with her a lot and she's a lovely, lovely lady. And we were talking about this because she actually read the book and she went, I always wondered about it. And are you convinced? I'm absolutely convinced. So our corruption inquiry, the Fitzgerald inquiry, had started on the Monday. We'd had a surveillance crew out looking for, reconnoitering the stronghold where this armed robber was living. I started the deliberate option plan on the Monday, worked through it on the Tuesday, sent the plan to the bosses, Force Command. It came back denying me the opportunity to use gas and distraction grenades, which I knew were required. And this guy was he was a violent man. You know, he'd shot a couple of people in cold blood. He was a vicious armed robber, just a piece of work. And he decided he was going to kill a witness. So that prompted our deployment. So basically, the Fitzgerald inquiry started on the Monday and it hadn't gone well. Hadn't gone well on the Tuesday. And this is the first time I'd ever been told when we were to launch an assault. So we were told we were to launch the assault the next morning. And on that Wednesday morning, that's when a particular senior police officer was due to give evidence at the corruption inquiry. And never in any operation I'd been involved in before had we been told when to launch the assault. Right? That's always up to the tactical team. And they wanted, I'm sure, They wanted a headline which was police capture #1 most wanted armed robber, to take some attention away from the adverse reporting that was going to happen that day from the Fitzgerald inquiry into corruption. And unfortunately, one of my mates was killed in a gun battle that eventuated from that raid. So they got the headlines all right, but not the headlines they were expecting. So and you're right, mate. That's Jesus. What's that? 35 years ago or so. 34 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm convinced, absolutely convinced that was the case.
Do you find
that is
so?
manipulation, and that is the media.
Oh, sorry, Max, you go. You're dropping out, Max. Anyway, I was going to say, I mean, there's levels of complexity to everything, right? And eventually, like if the general public knew, or I mean, I say general public when we're talking about government and the way they spin things, or the way they use media and manipulate it to get a story out to cover a different thing. Same with policing, same in the military. We have to accept at the bottom of the pyramid, if you're at the very bottom of the pyramid, the information that trickles down to you is obviously vetted, regardless of whether it's orders or whether it's secret, whatever it is. That somewhat, to some extent, in a complex situation, we have to accept that, but don't we? To accept, if we were told everything, we'd be doing nothing but just listening to the news 24/7, and it'd blow the brains out of half of the general public if they. When people get up these days and they're like, I just want the truth, and like it's like that old you can't handle the truth line, but in reality, I mean. Dave, from the story you've just given, 100%, everyone listening to this would look at that and go, yeah, that's a terrible way to get a headline and divert information from different things. But it's not really black and white, is it? Like you have to have levels of information kind of gates in any organization. And I guess if there's a question in this, like to what level would you accept senior ranking people misdirecting or deliberately pushing information down or pushing job orders down just to divert headlines? Is there any scenarios that you would accept that as okay?
Mate, if it was an ongoing investigation of a major nature, so, if it were to do with organised crime and there was a strategy behind it, yeah, I get that. I'd accept it and go, yep, no problem, order understood and received. But this wasn't. This was self-protection, and this was a cynical way to draw attention away from what they knew was coming. Because these guys knew they were screwed. They knew that the inquiry, it wasn't getting people into the witness box to try and trap them up and ask them a question, trap them up. The evidence was already there. The investigation's already been done. This was simply, okay, we're going to put this to you, excuse me, and if you deny it, trust me, we've got the evidence. So they knew that. But if it was, say, if it was a drug importation and, and I was a tactical team and they said, rightio, we need your team to hit this address at this point in time because it's a feint. Yeah. Okay, no problem. We'll do. Two different things. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think knowing how to clear a room and not having I don't have the tactical expertise of TRG, SRG, SOGgies, SX, no, but we got there was some combat shooting and room combat was something that we did get taught by Weeksy and some of the RSMs over the regiment that come across and taught.
Yeah,
but with no distraction grenades, no grenades, no, and just you're going through the funnel. And back then it was, I'm assuming you weren't playing the door, you're rushing the funnel.
Rushing the funnel, yeah. Yep.
Your first dude's getting fucking shot.
Yeah.
So it honestly sounds like if they're telling you don't use distraction grenades, don't use
don't use gas. Yeah. Yeah.
Because they want a story. And I know, okay, maybe me being a conspiracy theorist, and maybe the guy sitting in the chair isn't a tactically minded dude that's given the decisions, but that is
I think that was more it, Max. That was fucking appalling. We still did it. That's the thing. We still went, yep, we're going to get the bad guy. We all knew the risks. We knew our vests were inferior. Those level 2 vests we had, no ceramic plates. They were just designed to stop a shotty or a handgun. They were issued to every tactical team around the country. So every tactical team, we all knew they were useless. But we
like
still
how you
did the
call
job
them
anyway.
bullet resistant.
Yeah. Yeah, there ain't nothing, no proof about that, bulletproof about that. But I think it was a case of someone in command, and I know I'm not going to name him, but because he's dead anyway. But there's someone in command who didn't have a clue what we did, and was scared by the term grenades, so distraction grenades, and scared by tear gas because wow, if people get hurt, then this could look really bad. And I think it was as simple as that. It's the Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation is generally the right one. And I reckon that's what it was. And rather than come back and ask the question to say, okay, tell me what you intend to do with these and why. Nah, we're not going to do it. So that was part of my PTSD and my survivor guilt for years. I carried that for 25 years, and I've written about that in the book, and to just nicely, cleverly get that back to the book. But I've written very openly about that, mate, as you know. And I almost every day thought I should have fucking pushed more. I should have pushed back on it. I should have argued more, blah, blah, blah. Totally, I understand now, totally unfairly to myself. But when you're in the middle of all of that darkness and guilt and anxiety and depression, it doesn't go away, and for all those years, I thought about it, as I said, almost every day, if I'd done something differently, if I'd planned it differently. But as I've written in the book, and you've seen the photos that I've included, we had very little choice. It was, there was a primary entry point, and we just had to use that, and hoping that he wasn't as tuned up as he was. But as I've written, mate, distraction ladder went through his bedroom window. He was up in less than 2 seconds, firing a double tap straight through the skirting board where a team would have been. So it was on.
He was this guy was a cunning guy. Just some of the stuff he did, I couldn't believe it. I think because they teach this, some old adages from the people teach. They say, look, you've got to clear this room now. So, and you've got a lifetime to clear it, whether it's a short one or a long one. But those tactics weren't available to you guys back then. And that one guy, Pete, and you guys were doing this. We do it in training, and we might have to do it, a couple of times on a 9-month trip once in our lives. Talk about SS, regular infantry. But SRG boys and the special, that emergency squad that you guys were, that is daily. You're a one-man rushing a room.
Yeah, yep. Because that you're right, mate. That's what the tactics were to clear strongholds in those days. It was race straight in, but roll in distractions, every room, roll in, clear, engage the bad guys, save the hostage, move to the next, move to the next, move to the next. Yep. And it's even muscle memory. We'd stand on a 3-meter range. I actually had someone ask me who'd read the book, and she went, "Oh, you're standing really close to those targets. Wouldn't you be further away?" No, because that's what the size of a room is. Oh yeah. But we'd engage, and it even happened to me that morning where engage, double tap, bring the weapon back. Yeah, tap tap back, tap tap back. That's what fucking happened. I went tap tap back, and he went boom back at me. And I went, Jesus Christ, So even the way we train changed. And you're right, and I really like that saying. I haven't heard that before. But if I was to have my time over, it'd be, I'm taking my damn time to get to that room, and I'm just going to slice it up as we go through and engage where necessary, rather than like Starsky. You guys too young to remember that, but Starsky and Hutch would race into a room, one go high, one go low. That's all very good in Hollywood. But even
we also used to,
and even the rounds, even the rounds we used, mate, were FMJs. So 3 of mine went straight through him, and so then we went, okay, we're going to reassess everything we do now. Sadly, we lost one of the boys to get to that stage, but so we started looking at BAT rounds rather than full metal jackets and so on. And I actually went from using a H&K SMG MP5 to an 870p Ringmaster Remington shotgun, a good old pump action shotty with that massive stopping power with SG rounds. because I didn't want to ever be in a situation again where my rounds went through a bad guy and he fired back. You know, so tactics continually evolve. You know, and I'm very, very flattered that I'm still a welcome guest at the current CERT Special Emergency Response Team in Queensland. Whenever I go up there, they embrace me with open arms, which is lovely. And I've looked at the gear they've got now on the way to train and go, wow, you know, it's a whole different universe. You know,
Well,
I'm pretty sure
we've got mates in Queensland that did their cert, and we talked.
There you go.
And you come in on the show, and they're like, "He's a fucking legend." And that's 25 years later, mate. So yeah.
Oh, it's pretty cool to hear, mate. Thank you. That's pretty cool. That's actually nice.
But I mean, this took you down. I mean, and this is where this post that happening, this is where you went dark, right? And this is where things changed for you. Was the thing? How did looking back at it now, 70s and 80s, PTSD wasn't a thing called PTSD. Were you're just like, oh, that guy's fucking cooked? Like, what they're saying? You just bottled it up.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Mate, I started drinking a shitload more than I normally did. And I just got angry. I wanted to slot as many bad guys as I could, you know, and that was pure revenge. I think I probably tried to rationalize it by saying we're not going to have anybody killed again, etc. But I actually wanted to knock as many as I could. Pure revenge for losing Pete, for sure. And my drinking was every day. And on the range, I turned from, you know, I used to run a pretty effective range as an instructor because I was a counterterrorism instructor as well as being one of the assault guys. But I suddenly changed in my range drills, and I'd absolutely fucking give it to people, you know, rather than having that firm but fair attitude before. I wanted everything to be perfect. And I'm sure my peers thought, wow, Banksy's he's an angry guy these days, rather than seeing what my motivation was behind that, which was to save lives, their lives. Didn't care about the bad guys. And I kept it all hidden. You know, I bottled it right up. A couple of my mates, you know, had asked me if I was okay, and I'd do the alpha male thing again. Yeah, no problem at all. The only person I think from memory I spoke to in that first sort of 6 months or so was my doctor, when I thought I'm in trouble here. So it's just not right anymore. And I went to my doctor and he said, so what's going on? And I burst into tears and couldn't stop crying. And he gave me a couple of weeks off. But we had no psychological support. And I think even in those days,
was there, mate, like, to be honest, so these days you have verbiage and you can say, hey, you know, Adrian, hey, bro, I'm going to call him up and say, hey, man, I'm having a rough time. And he's like, oh, yeah, cool. The guy's needs a hand. Was there, speaking to a lot of people from the 70s, 80s and that verbiage wasn't there. How do I even telling somebody I'm fucking in a pickle?
Mate, and here's a good example. So a friend of mine, Zulu, who I've written about in the first book and the second book, really tough Maori guy, covert guy, was in tactical with me. Great guy, one of my best friends. We were talking about this when I was in Brisbane for my book launch last month. And I did a couple of speaking presentations. One was at the police museum, so the Sunday speakers thing they have. And I was talking about the book, but talking about this specifically. And Zulu said later, he said, mate, I felt guilt for so long. I said, over what? And he said, there was a covert operative that they put into a watch house cell with this maggot that murdered a young girl. He and his de facto wife kidnapped her and raped her and murdered her in Noosa. Lovely little girl, 12-year-old girl. And so they put this undercover guy in there with the offender to try to get some sort of confessional evidence from him, you know, sit in the cell overnight with him. And he said some things and so on. This undercover guy made the mistake of looking at the autopsy photos of this poor little girl and what they did to her, and it fucked him. And Zulu said maybe 2-3 months later after that, they were in the police club because we had our own licensed boozer. And he said he was up there and this guy said to Zulu, he said, mate, I've got some problems. And Zulu said, fuck, we've all got problems, mate, have another beer. And he said he's carried guilt now for years because this guy actually had a breakdown and left the cops. And I said, mate, we didn't know. We just didn't know how to talk to each other. You know, there was this whole bullshit alpha male facade that if you let that chink in the armor show, your mates might have thought you were weak. So it was really, we all internalized it because it was our fault, not because your mates would say that, but that was the feeling you had. So you just went, bang.
I wonder if it's so it's internalization of your mates not wanting to feel weak. Now, if we can change the language and say the tribe, you didn't want to look weak in front of the tribe, and especially coming from a background where you know, tribe and belonging and that was important, and we know that now that's quite the norm for most service industries. Maybe that's something that they need to sort of look at, that you didn't want to let the tribe down, and that
sure. Mate, it's you know, I still see mates who are in the job up there, some of the cert guys as well, and things have changed, and I think, you know, it's your generation. Your generation are actually more open to conversation than ours was, and you know, and I see it now with friends of my daughters. You know, and I'm talking guys, you know, they're really open about feelings and emotions and attitudes and perceptions and life. That's the biggest part of the battle that's been won. So what we have to do then is have those guys and girls who work in the sharp end actually understand that it's okay to talk to each other as well, you know, and maybe it's about verbiage.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree that the younger generations now are definitely more emotionally intelligent. Yeah. I hope this isn't true, but it's starting to look to me like there's a trade-off between emotional intelligence and resilience. And this is probably just me being biased, but mine and Max's generation is almost at the intersection point where we've grown up with resilience, no emotional intelligence, reached a point, and now we're okay to start getting emotionally intelligent. The younger kids, and I'm talking 18-year-olds at the moment, the majority of them, you have a chat to them about anything that involves mental health and emotional intelligence, and they're aware, they're open to talk about anything. But they've got absolutely no resilience. And I think that's I don't know if it is a trade-off or whether it's just coincidence, but it's something I think we've got to be careful, because Kieran too, he's one of our mates, he's a veteran. He does he's done a psych degree. He's an intelligent guy, and he is pushing back hard against overthinking the talking space and wrapping people in cotton wool and going, oh, you've got an issue. Okay, let's sit down and we'll wrap you in cotton wool and we'll treat you all. He's like, the best thing that ever happened to me was I was going through some dramas. And my brother, who was also a veteran and I think psych qual, was like, get up, mate. Get the fuck up and keep moving. That is it. And he's like, if I was wrapped in cotton wool, I would have played that victim card. I would have eventually convinced myself that I was more broken. To have that blokey mentality around me to go, get back on the horse, champ, was exactly what he needed. And I know everyone's different, but that is him being kind of right in the center of finding emotional intelligence in his career path now, but also having that resilience to go, yeah, if I get a smack around the head, or if the blokes around me are like, just man up for a minute. At the moment, you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to say, oh, if someone comes to you, I mean, and I get it, but if you say no, you just got to man up, that's frowned upon. But I think somewhere in there's a need for a little bit of that too.
Yeah, I agree, mate. I was just thinking, I heard you guys interview, and I can't remember who it was, but you were interviewing a veteran, and the comment was, with increased sensitivity comes reduced capability, and I think that's spot on. You've got to have a balance, you know. So you've got to be emotionally intelligent, but you've still got to be able to. You're absolutely right, mate. Bounce back. You know, have a go, have a crack. It's okay to talk about it, mate, and talk about it. Absolutely. Yep. You know, like I'm a peer support officer volunteer for Police Veterans Victoria, and cops who are struggling, have a chat, have a coffee, say, look, this is what happened to me. I get it, but this is how I got through it. Right. And you're right, it's not playing the victim and curling up in the corner. So there's got to be a little tough love, certainly empathy, but tough love as well. And that phrase I've been using, I heard the podcast a couple of months ago, and I wish I could remember who it was, and Mex might be able to tell us who, but I think you were on it, Mex, where the comment was, with increased sensitivity comes reduced capability. And I've adopted that.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was probably Kieran, the bloke I'm talking about.
Okay, there you go.
Probably was. But mate, what you just said, tough love, 100%. I think just tough on its own doesn't work.
Yeah,
just love on its own. I mean, maybe in a utopian world, tough love's in the middle, and that's the perfect balance of both.
Yeah, it's positive language around it, and so, like, mate, you will be okay. I'm here to help you. Like, but you need to take the first step. You are gonna be okay.
Yep.
But you need to take the first step, and I'm with you.
Yeah.
Like with you.
I can't do it for you. I can't do it for you, but I'll be right beside you. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. And if that, and I reflect on stuff as you do, if that attitude had been around after Operation Flashdance, my recovery would have been 20 years before it was. But it was just a different world. And from that we learn, which is why I wanted to write this, and I wanted to write it openly, and I wanted to write about the darkness so that first responders, and I'm hoping ADF people as well, when they read it, will go, fuck, man, this resonates with me. And I'm not the only one that it's happening to, because a lot of people still think they are, particularly in the first responder space. You guys have done a great job bringing it out of the darkness into the open, and I absolutely applaud that. But there's still a stigma around mental health. And if I can, I've actually had, I don't know, maybe 20 people contact me through social media since I've been talking about this, with the last book and this current one. And they've contacted me, people I don't know, just to say, man, thank you for talking about this so openly. I thought it was just me. And I hear that a lot, so that's why I wanted to write it, suicidal ideation. And, I was going to say we won't ruin the book, but clearly I'm alive, so I didn't do it. But, I actually considered taking myself out one night, and I've written very openly about that as well. I got to the stage of putting the weapon in my mouth. And the fact that also it's about, recovery is more than possible. In my case, it was just one affirmation that really sealed the deal for me. And then I went, fuck. And then later, when I had a major anxiety breakdown, I suppose, without any catalyst, that's when that put me on the road to understanding that PTSD was not just for people who'd fought overseas. Because I actually thought, and I know I've put it in the book, I actually thought, fuck, I can't have PTSD. That's for people who've been through some really bad shit. and I look back on that now and go, well, Banksy, you did go through some bad shit.
Yeah, you're right.
So that's right. So, that's the message I wanted to portray. So with the first book, I wanted to, have people maybe finish it and go, shit, I hadn't thought about cops in that way before. It's more than just being a traffic cop or being a pain in the ass for a noisy party. With this one, I would love people to be able to finish it and go, fuck, I never realized that's what first responders can go through. And I'll have a different mental attitude about cops next time I see them. Because no one knows, like you might come across a cop who's just, a bit of a prick. You don't know what he or she has just done in the last 3 hours. The infant death or the fatal road accident or whatever, or, any of that stuff. You don't know what they've seen, and yet they bounce back and they come straight back on the road. So, and I think cops these days, mate, shit they do is much harder than what we used to do. You've got
camera now as well,
the ICE epidemic. Oh man, I look at stuff. I look at stuff on YouTube or Facebook or Insta where cops have been filmed, and you've got the sovereign citizen saying, I don't contract with you, and I don't have to do what you tell me. I tell you, back in my day, bang, here's your attitude adjustment. But now these poor buggers have to just bite their tongue, So,
mate, I feel for cops at the moment with all this COVID stuff going on, and I definitely don't want to turn this podcast into a COVID chat.
Yeah.
But I've been speaking to a few of the Special Forces military boys in Sydney who now have been tasked to assist with really mundane COVID stuff, domestic in Australia, when they're used to being overseas, living this high adrenaline-filled, purpose-driven life. And they are all showing signs of depression. I mean, it's only natural. I mean, they'll bounce back as soon as they start getting some better jobs. But there's a lot of hate on the street at the moment for cops who are giving fines to people for COVID breaches, and I'm like, that is not what they signed up to do. None of these people joined the cops to go and give people who are out of work and stressing with life fines for not wearing a mask. Not a single cop that I know, and I got a few mates that are cops as well. None of them signed up to do that. They've been put in that position. Yeah, and I mean, the general public needs to look from both sides of the coin on that one too.
They've got to do what they're told to do.
Absolutely.
You know? And back in the day, you could use discretion. You could say, okay, I'm not going to do anything. You seem like a good bloke. You know, I did it when I'd, you might find a joint in someone's pocket. And unless they were a prick, you just go, no, it's okay. I'll just, look, never happened. Move on. Off you go. Now, because there's so much public attention on what police do, they can't actually use their discretion anymore. So they have to go 100%. It's like traffic tickets. Shit, I'd only ever give the brief time I spent in uniform, I'd only give a traffic ticket to someone if they broke the Hoons Act, as we called it. If they were a complete dick and went straight through a red light and it was dangerous, they get a ticket. Or they failed the attitude test. You pull a car up and they go, oh, right, you've got a quota, have you? Actually, no, I could write as many as I want. And you'll get it. I'm just going to go my ticket book. But you had a discretion to do it, If someone was actually a pretty decent person, you'd say, listen, here's your warning, don't do it again. And that did more for public relations than anything, I reckon. Besides, writing traffic tickets shitted me. So that was a win-win. But now cops can't use that discretion. So, can you imagine if they're out in a public park and someone's sitting without a mask on a bench and they walk past or just said, put your mask on, some dick would be filming it and then posting that to social media to go, oh, the cops aren't doing their job.
Oh, 100%. And it's the same tribalism and the tribal mentality. People have picked a team. They're pro-vax or anti-vax, or they're pro-mask, anti-mask. Yeah. And if they're pro-following the rules, I had the cops drive down our street last week because one of the neighbours' kids was playing with the kids next door, and the bloke 2 doors up thought that was a breach of the rules, which if you're going to go black and white, it probably is. Yeah. But I think that's a problem, and I think it's a problem in the cops and the military is over the past 1 or 2 decades, from the top down, I'm assuming someone's got to the point where they're like, we don't trust the what's between the ears of our junior soldiers and our junior cops. Therefore, don't let them use their own discretion. They must get it's black and white, and that is the law, and that's what they stick to. And then you get fined for doing 4Ks over the speed limit, and the cops aren't allowed to be like, yeah, all right, mate, I get your kind of scenario. And like you said earlier, you never know what someone's been through in the last 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 years, whatever it is.
That's right. It got so bad in Queensland after the corruption inquiry that the call them internal affairs, but call them internal affairs, whatever the term was, they'd actually send people out undercover in a car to be pulled up by a cop and see if the cop wrote them a ticket or not. They go, oh, look, pulled over and say, oh, look, mate, I'm in the job. Show your badge. Yeah, fair enough, mate. Don't do it again. Bang, that was an automatic misconduct charge.
Really?
Oh, it was just bullshit. And that's complete overreaction. Fair enough, target a cop for an integrity test who you think's been stealing money or selling drugs. Absolutely, you're stealing prop. Absolutely, go your hardest, and you should. But targeting someone because you think they might let another cop off a speeding ticket, wow. That's pretty ineffective use of resources. So that happened across the country. So you've now got also a culture where, if Mex and I were working together and I pulled you over, Adrian, and we're all cops, and I went to Mex, look, we'll just look after him and let him go, Mex would be obliged to report my conduct. Yeah,
that's not trust. That is not trust.
No. And absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And then you're expecting cops to go up to a violent situation and deal with it appropriately and covers each other's backs. or to take immediate use of deadly force action. So the Burke Street thing a couple of years ago, where that guy went off and was shot, tried to stabbed a few people and was shot. That it just, for me, it doesn't balance properly. You're expecting people, and the average cop on the street in uniform is probably average age, maybe 24. So you're expecting these young people to make decisions and give them the authority to do that, yet you're not going to trust them to do other things.
Mm.
It's a complete mixed message. So I'll bleed blue until I die. But I really feel for them now. With you've got to have accountability, but there's way over the top accountability now.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that corruption stuff really, it is exactly right. It is a complete over adjustment, knee jerk reaction. You have to trust. They're the police. If you can't trust the police, then we've failed as a country. Haven't we?
But I mean, that's not just coming from corruption. That ties back into what we were saying before. That the higher ups, the people at the top of the food chain, are so worried about the media that, and this in this day and age, you better believe it that if a cop lets one person off and some idiot catches it on their phone, a current affairs running that story next Monday night, and someone's getting hung out to dry for it. But it's created. It's the culture in all cops, military, all kind of branches is now follow the rules. They're black and white. Do nothing wrong. I'm going to micromanage you to death, and don't use your brain because I don't believe you have one.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And I look at special forces soldiers where they're encouraged to think individually, and also operate in small teams. Now, where the hell is that going to be in 10 years? If this whole culture is permeating across the army into special forces as well, where's going to be that individual thinking? And, when the shit hits the fan, how much are you going to trust your mates? Yeah, it's just, it concerns me greatly because society's just, we're changing the rules. From a policing perspective, the bad guys don't change their rules of engagement or their rules of activity. They have no bloody rules. And from an ADF perspective, it made me laugh today. The Taliban are now calling for investigations into war crimes because Australian soldiers have done the wrong thing. And the media are they're entertaining it.
Well, they're not entertaining it. I mean, what was that? Was that the Daily Telegraph or something today?
No, it was the Age or the Herald Sun or something. I'm going, fuck, but why would you publish it in the first place?
To stir shit and sell ads. Right. That is it.
Yeah.
Me and Max had a little, because we do these little short episodes a couple of times a week just talking about the news now, and rather than a 90-minute podcast, we just touch on three stories of the day that you need to pay some more attention to. And one of the big ones we kind of broke down a week or so back was the way the media is grabbing these stories. Monday, they run a story on the Veteran Royal Commission into Suicide and how the whole country needs to get behind veterans and improve mental health. The next day, they run a story like this where the Taliban accuses Australians of war crimes. I'm like, what are you trying to achieve here? You're turning the public. Monday, pro-veteran. Tuesday, hate them all. Wednesday, they kill babies. Thursday, let's rally behind them. I'm like, it's just burning people out.
It is. Yeah, it is. It is, because it's that classic 24-hour news cycle. Once upon a time when I was a young cop, journalists were actually journalists. They actually reported the news, and they were supportive generally of what we were doing. At some time in the 90s, late 90s or something, it all changed. It's all about the sensationalism. Let's attack the fabric of what we do as a society. Let's not applaud the majority of the population for doing the right thing. No. Let's just attack the shit out of everything else. And you see that with the younger generation. I knew I'd be an old dude someday when I talk about the younger generation.
Mate, I'm 35. I'm already calling the young diggers the young generation.
And the way they glean their information is not from regular news. It's from the net, YouTube, Instagram, and so on. And that's just, cherry picking parts of news reports out that suit the narrative of whomever. It's just skewed. The whole way that we value things in society now and things we should value is completely skewed.
Mate, and it's dangerous. They're playing on like baseline human psychology that we have inbuilt lie detectors. I mean, that's how we are realistically. Everyone on this call right now is the tip of the spear from humans that dated back a couple 100,000 years ago. The ones that weren't as savvy, they've died. Their bloodlines have died out. Humans have evolved to have inbuilt lie detectors or bullshit detectors because we want to know. As soon as we figured out how to tell lies, humans started deceiving each other. And we're like, my survivability relies on my ability to call bullshit. And so I sit here every day, like breaking down news and going, I can call bullshit on that. I can call bullshit on that. At the same time, the media is playing on the fact that we want to be, our ego makes us want to be the first one to know something. So if we read a headline and it's one of those gotcha moments, you want to be the first one to share it with all your mates. And I mean, I've been caught out on this in the past. There was a story that I believed in so much that when it finally hit the news, I shared it with everyone and I read 2 paragraphs down after I'd shared it. I'm like, oh shit, that is completely, that is the opposite to the point I was trying to make. And the media's playing on that, just going big juicy headline, doesn't matter there's no substance to it. Humans by nature want to rapidly share a big juicy headline. And young people are getting their news from Facebook, which is a big juicy headline and no substance. I mean, exactly right. Blog sites, if you see a headline on Facebook now, even newspapers, you hit the headline, you click on it, you go through. If you don't hit a paywall, you'll see the headline again and then an ad. And then another one that kind of leads onto what the story might be about, then another 2 ads, and then you've got to scroll down about 20 pages before you actually get to the guts of the article because they don't care. They know no one's going to read it. They just want the headline.
They want that click through. It's the social dilemma. You know, that's a whole another conversation we could have about the way in which, as human beings, we now communicate with each other. You know, it's and the algorithms that drive you to, you know, your alt-right or your far left or whatever is just fucking frightening. You know? But what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I can tie that back to what we were just talking about. It's almost like parts of our society are almost at the point where they believe robots and artificial intelligence are coming, and that's the way our leadership is governing. They're governing with black and white rules. There is no room for reason or for interpretation. It's like, you do this. It's like they're governing or developing culture from a world 100 years in the future, or maybe 50, who knows, where we're dealing with robots and AI, whereas at the moment they don't want to inspire free thought at the bottom of the pyramid.
Yeah, exactly, mate. You know, what concerns me is the destruction of statues and the removal of books and literature because they don't fit a paradigm. And again, I go back to, as we were saying before, you know, put a sign in front of your face, in front of your house if you aren't vaccinated is like wearing a yellow star in Germany in the 1930s. And removing books from libraries because they're offensive. Gee whiz, I think the Nazi Party burned books. You know, and it's not. It concerns me that people aren't making these observations. They're just going, no, they're offensive. You know, people are offended by it now. Okay, it's still part of our history. So, you know, the argument should be
a whole lot more offended when we forget about the history that happened and we repeat it. They're going to be a whole lot more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely, mate. That's what I was striving to say. It infuriates me that we're so woke now that you're right. We are obliterating our history and what, you know, those who don't learn from it, doomed to repeat it. But you can't have that argument. You can't have that logical discussion with a woke person because they will just shoot you down with some clever saying or phrase or whatever that doesn't have anything to do with the discussion at hand. You know, I actually you know, sometimes when I'm looking out the window and being all philosophical, I think, you know, what's it going to be like in 50 years for ADF and police? How the hell are they going to do what they're supposed to do when you've got an ADF comprised of woke people? You know, so when China decides that they're going to do some stuff in 50 years, are we going to debate them out of it? You know?
No, I don't think. I mean, I think woke cultures are. I think it's reached its kind of height, it'll slowly merge back towards the middle. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And I mean, I think everyone's learned a bit from it. I've definitely, the things I used to think, I mean, as well, your brain doesn't evolve properly till you're about 25. So the stuff I was talking about 10, 15 years ago probably made no sense regardless. But I've definitely been a conservative, right-wing-ish kind of, or right-leaning thinker organically. But over the last 10 to 15 years, there's definitely things that I've had to look at and broken down and tried to see both sides of the coin. I'm like, yeah, maybe the people on the left have got a point here. But no, mate, where we're going to be in 50 years, we RoboCop. We have to, I assume we're going to be a RoboCop world, and that is scary because if someone's writing code for governance and policing, and it is so contrasting in that there is a line in the sand, that is right, that is wrong, there's no interpretation. We're going to turn into Nazi Germany.
Yeah, I agree, mate, and I agree with you, Adrian. My personal attitudes have probably gone a little left in the last few years as I've researched more, and certainly my kids have alerted me to some attitudes that weren't right. Absolutely, get all that. But my concern is the woke culture is completely way over to the left. So I hope you're right. I hope that it's reached its zenith and it'll start to calm down. But I just, what worries me is that we as a society will have no free thought. And whether it's right or wrong is immaterial. Free thought should be free thought. So it can be debated, it can be discussed and potentially people's attitudes can be changed. But if you are censoring free thought and discussion, then that's a slippery slope to go down as well, because it's just not going to bode well for anybody.
No, it's scary but exciting. I think we're going to go. I mean, it's like you said, it's happened through history over and over again. We just choose to ignore the pieces of history that we don't want to pay attention to. And I mean, this happened to Rome. Rome went super left wing, and they started experimenting with multiple gender options and random shit when they got fat, dumb, and happy. And next minute, they're gone.
That's right. The Huns were at the gate.
Yeah, and I mean, it feels like that's happening in America at the moment. Hopefully not, but
well.
Anyway.
Wow.
Mex, you better get this one. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, Mex, you better get this back on the book, mate.
Yeah, I was going to see, reading my mind. So I was going to say, when all this stuff worries you, what you really need to do is get a good book.
Yeah, exactly.
Turn off social media. Go and grab yourself a gun to the head, and in there, there's 2 points that I wanted. We'll bring this back to police.
Sure.
And this is going to be amazing. I'm really excited. Without giving away too much. So, and I know this was tough for you. I know the Rocky case and the witness protection thing was tough, but what I want to talk about is the mafia and the effect that what was that, the 80s, 70s?
Yeah, I met Rocky in 1986. Yeah.
And talking about, you were an undercover cop, so you saw good in some of the people that you were dealing with, and Larry and these people who had to get out of the job because they were sort of booking people for trafficking, for being late and they sort of started to become conflicted, and they had to get the fuck out of it because they're like, some of these people are just good people that took a different path.
Yeah.
And I know, but for Rocky, and I know this is important for you, but I didn't know the effect that the mafia was having in Australia. Was that an offshoot of the Sicilian mafia?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, you bet. Mate, the mafia really took foothold in Griffith. Was called Griffiths was the town of Grass Castles, and the crops that were grown with the permission of some bent New South Wales coppers were worth millions. And so the mafia had a foothold there. And they're also in North Queensland, the massive Italian population, that the mafia was known as the Black Hand. And they were absolutely involved in Australian organised crime, definitely in the 70s and 80s. They're still around, they're not as big as they were, but they were certainly, when I was in criminal intelligence, my desk was outlaw motorcycle gangs. One of my colleagues had Italian organised crime. So we gathered intel from all over the country, and in some cases internationally. Yeah, absolutely. Had their own rules, murderous bastards, and organised criminals for sure. It started with notoriety. Started with the murder of Donald Mackay, who was killed in Griffith. He was a member of Parliament who was an outspoken against the mafia drug crops, and he was shot to death outside his furniture store. Body never found.
So a federal
never
member,
solved.
Federal member Griffith.
Yeah, a state member. I think he was a state member. Yeah, got assassinated. Yep.
Was that one of the that was one of the Underbelly seasons, wasn't it? Around the Italians up around Griffith.
Yeah, it was. And the only reason I go is Underbelly's sort of like Law and Order.
Yeah, that's where I get my news.
I know, dude. We've got to catch up more. But the mafia were absolutely major threat. And so when I met Rocky, we won't give too much away. Rocky was a witness who was a witness in a mafia drug crop, and then ultimately in the murder of one of his mates. And Rocky came forward and went to the homicide squad in Sydney, and we were tasked with protecting him for 6 months. And you're right, Mex, because I'd been an undercover cop, I warmed to him pretty much straight away because he was a good little guy. You know, he was funny, he was engaging, he was a boxer, he was, we shared the same taste in music. So I basically, not 24 hours a day, but close to it, spent 6 months with Rocky. And I treated him almost as a mate, except it's unusual for your mate to be carrying an MP5 and a 9mm and a shoulder holster everywhere you go. But yeah, I really connected with him. And I think had I not been an undercover guy for a couple of years, I probably would have kept him at arm's distance. But, once you have a personal relationship with someone in that environment, he probably knew more about me than most of my mates did. That's how close our connection was. And I won't say anything more about that. It'll sound like Forrest Gump. I'm not going to say anything more about that because people do need to read that. Yeah.
Absolutely, mate. Is this something that, knowing back in the 70s and 80s, marijuana, super legal, like you're going to jail, like you did sting operations to bust people for marijuana. Now we're using marijuana for medical purposes. DVA's issuing it to veterans in trials. And trying to tie that back into the cancel culture, I'm just interested in how you feel about, so there'll be people that you've put away for selling marijuana?
Oh, pounds of it. Yeah. Major deals. Yeah. Yep.
I have now. How do you look at it? How do you look at that?
Yeah, mate. I had a change in attitude about cannabis pretty soon after I left undercover. I actually wrote a paper when I was doing an undergrad degree as a detective sergeant on the argument for legalizing cannabis, and wasn't very well received by my bosses, I must say. But I'm a firm believer in legalization, and I've had this debate with people, but probably two reasons. One is it's not a gateway drug. There's a lot of mythology around that. The only reason cannabis can be perceived as a gateway drug is when you've got someone sitting in the same environment scoring a bag of weed from the same guy who can actually sell them coke or speed or ice or whatever. Yeah, you break that cycle. Then you break that connection. And interestingly, South Australia, I think in 1982, decriminalised possession of weed. So it was no longer a criminal offence. If you were caught with less than an ounce, the police would write you a ticket. So you had nothing recorded against your name. Yeah, you could grow 2 plants in your backyard for your own use back in those days. What the stats showed was cannabis use actually decreased. Right? So we've got a real life example in Australia about that. So the big thing for me is you break the back of organised crime involvement in marijuana crops and the millions of dollars they make on the black market. You control the quality of it. You sell it through licensed outlets, and you tax the bejesus out of it. And the tax rate from that then goes into health and education, or law enforcement, or hospital, or whatever. Yeah, and that tax amount would be massive in this country. So I've had the debate with people where they've said it causes schizophrenia. Yeah, the reality is in some people it does. So is alcohol. And yet we don't have an issue with alcohol. And I've never, ever once as a cop been to a violent situation where someone's stoned.
Mm.
I've been to a lot of places where people have been drunk and beating the crap out of each other. But the biggest argument you have when you're stoned is whose turn it is to make a cup of tea.
Mm.
Pink Floyd versus
who's paying for Uber Eats. Mate,
I wish I'd come up with that concept years ago about Uber Eats.
Yeah, mate, I had the same type of experience. I did no drugs when I was younger. None when I was in the military. Got very, very interested and then educated on cannabis and psychedelics when I left the military. Probably about 5 years after I left.
Yeah.
Same as always, education's the key. Like that is, if you just want to go out and experiment with drugs, definitely as a child or as a teenager, it's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Even weed. Your brain's just not developed enough.
Yeah.
But if you understand why you're doing it, I mean, we were at the point now where thankfully Australia, about 10 years too late, is slowly coming around. There's a few young veterans, actually. I spoke to one of them this morning. They're working with a cannabis company to help facilitate getting it through DVA trials and whatever has to happen so that we can start getting it out. Because, I mean, if you're using it just to get baked all day, every day, that's a problem. More often than not, that is a symptom of an underlying problem that you're not focusing on. And that's where I've seen it be referred to as a gateway drug. And it's like, it's got nothing to do with cannabis. It's the fact that they've got a miserably depressed person over here trying to remove themselves from reality by whatever means possible. And whatever they do, like you said, whatever they do, that's what they're taking. But cannabis is unbelievably effective for myself, for so many people that I've spoken to, when used with prescribed or the right doses to treat anxiety and to overcome anxiety. And it's phenomenal. And I had to learn about this by digging through the internet and absorbing what may or may not have been accurate information. And the sooner we legalise it, the sooner we can get legitimate psychs and doctors and whatever talking about this, pushing proper information out.
Absolutely, mate. It's interesting. The Israelis, and you probably across this as well, the Israelis have experimented for quite some time with microdosing to treat PTSD. So it's not the dreadlock brigade hanging out at a commune dropping acid every day. It's actually there's a lot of evidence behind psychedelic use to open those neural pathways and get them back to some sort of sense of normalcy. And I just think it's high time. It's absolute time that the government looked at this realistically and stopped worrying about losing the Conservative vote and had some courage to actually legalise it. Because I follow with great interest what's happening in the States. And the only thing that is of some concern is how do you control people driving when they're using cannabis? So there's got to be some way to do that. Although having said that, back in the old days, long before roadside breath tests that you have now, you'd actually stop someone and look at their mannerisms, their mode of speech, and it was called indicia. So you may have to go back to doing that, have random testing, etc. But not making a decision based on the actions of a few who would do that is I think, the wrong way to look at it. Because as I keep saying, break the back of organised crime, make it legal. And what I think would happen is that those people who genuinely want to use it for the right reasons would do it. But if it loses the outlaw image, then you're probably going to have a lot less people taking it up.
Absolutely.
We should run for politics, boys.
Well, it'd be the hunting, fishing, and marijuana party. I think I'd be running for.
No,
what the hell? Let's start one up.
Yeah,
absolutely. But that is, speaking with people in Parliament from the Liberal side of things, that is the only reason that they won't push it through is because they lose the Conservative vote. What they don't know is that they gain the other side of it. Could you imagine if you were the Liberal Party legalising cannabis for medical reasons? I think that would be something, anyway, above my pay grade.
Yeah, it'd change the whole. Yeah, sorry, buddy. Go.
You've got the CEO of one of Australia's up and coming mental health charities and you've got one of Australia's most decorated police officers and an undercover operative. Like, this experience and this panel, you have to listen to that experience. These are not 18-year-old kids making random decisions. These are educated people with the best interests of all of us.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah. And you know, any platform that I can use to have that message, I will. You know, so maybe when we get to the stage, guys, where we're getting some political attention, wheel me out. More than happy to do it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Done.
Well, mate, I think without giving, because otherwise I'm going to keep going. I'm going to give away your book, and then no one's going to buy the bloody thing. Guys, if you are listening to this podcast, and I know a lot of you are listening in the cages or at work driving, this is a book you need to go and pick up. It is written by a guy, and it is palatable and readable for everyone in our demographic. It breaks down experiences. There's excitement, there's activity, there's realness to it. Go and check it out. Gun to the Head by Keith Banks. Mate, where can they find the book?
Mate, Booktopia, definitely online, Booktopia or Amazon. It's in Audible, ebooks, and for those states that are lucky enough not to be living through lockdown, your normal bookstores, QBD, Dimmicks, and so on. So, yeah, thanks, mate. I appreciate that, and I just think it's, of course, I'm biased, but I think it's got a lot to say, and it's got a great message.
Absolutely, mate. Anything we can do to help you guys. That was the Instruction Sold Separately podcast. Remembering that we proudly support Swiss 8 as a veteran-led mental health charity. Go and check out their free app in stores now. And while you're online, go and jump on Audible, download Gun to the Head. You're going to bloody enjoy it. I guarantee it. Cheers, Keith. Thanks for coming on, mate. And hope to
Thanks, guys. Yeah, look forward to it. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks, mate.